So good morning, everyone, and you're very welcome. My name is Simon Faulkner, and I am the Senior Client Advisor within Life Science and Health Tech Department here at Enterprise Ireland. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today as we break down the latest changes in European health data policy and what they mean for Irish SMEs. So essentially, this webinar is focused on unpacking the European health data space regulation. This is the third session of a six-part series delivered in partnership with Vulcan Consulting and designed to help you navigate the evolving national and European policy. The goal of this series is to demystify complex legislation and provide you with practical insights and actionable advice. So in this webinar, we'll cover what the European Health Data Space Regulation means for your business. I'm delighted today to be joined by a fantastic panel of speakers. To begin with, we have Hannah Bartakova and Eve Murphy from Vulcan Consulting. We also have Geraldine O'Flynn on the call today, who's joining us from Health Innovation Hub Ireland. So before we commence the presentation, if you do have any questions during the session, please put them into the chat function and we'll have time to address some of those at the end. We'd also like to note to everyone before we commence that this session will be recorded. So with that, I'll hand over to the speakers to get us started.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Simon, and thanks to everyone for being here this morning. So I'll start by introducing myself and our role at Vulcan Consulting, and then I'll hand over to my fellow speakers. So at Vulcan, we work at the intersection of EU policy and business operations, helping companies translate legislation into practical systems that actually work on the ground. And so that's what we are going to do today for the European Health Data Space Regulation. I'm Hannah Bartakova. I'm the head of Vulcan Brussels office, and I've spent over 12 years inside the EU ecosystem. From the European Parliament to European trade associations and consultancies, helping organizations navigate the EU policy and the politics behind it. And over the past few years, my work has been very heavily focused on healthcare, including projects on pharmaceuticals, data gathering, healthcare workers, and especially information and data sharing also during the COVID-19 crisis. So now I will hand over to my fellow speakers to introduce themselves, and then we can dive into the substance. So Niamh, you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eve Murphy, and I'm an account executive here at Vulcan's Brussels office. So here in Brussels, I'm specializing in health and trade policy with a focus on how regulatory and political development shape strategic decision-making. Lately, I've been working closely with clients on several important EU health files, such as Critical Medicines Act, GPL, and the incoming Biotech Act. And I pass it on to Geraldine to introduce herself.
Good morning. My name is Geraldine O'Flynn. I am the manager of Health Innovation Hub Ireland in the West region. At Health Innovation Hub Ireland, we work at the intersection of healthcare and industry, supporting innovators to test and scale solutions that improve patient care and system efficiency. And today I'll share how Health Innovation Hub Ireland supports the health system and industry in preparing for opportunities like the European Health Data Space, ensuring that innovation aligns with national priorities such as launch of care. And thank you. It's lovely to be here.
So let's start with what the European Health Data Space actually does. So the EHDS will create a single EU-wide framework for electronic health record systems. So the aim is to make health data more accessible, more secure, and more useful across borders. There will be two main types of data use. So we have primary use, which will be about the direct care of patients. And this includes making sure that healthcare professionals across member states can securely access essential health information when treating a patient, such as prescriptions or patient summaries. And this will be enabled through the cross-border digital infrastructure, My Health at EU. The secondary use focuses on using health data for broader purposes, things like research, product design, public health monitoring, policy planning, and managing health systems. And this will happen through another infrastructure, which is called the Health Data at EU. The EHDS sits within the wider European Health Union and builds on the EU's broader data strategy, which aims to create cross-sector data spaces that enable safer and more efficient and more innovative use of data across the EU, such as, for example, the energy data space or the agriculture data space. But the EHDS is actually the first fully developed and legislated on the EU EU Common European Data Spaces.
Okay, so now let's look at the regulatory status and what's going to happen next. So since we're dealing with an EU regulation, it applies directly and uniformly across all member states the moment it takes effect. That means there will be no extra national laws needed. The EHDS regulation was adopted in March 2025, and its requirements will be phased in starting from the 26th of March 2027. So while the framework is in place, implementation will take shape gradually over the next few years. So a key part of this process will be the implementing acts that the European Commission must adopt to define the operational rules. These are going to include things such as the establishment of the EHDS board in Q1 2026, the operational rules for My Health at EU in Q2 2026, a common identification and authentication mechanism in Q2 2026, and the detailed dataset requirements expected in Q3 2026. Apart from this, we can also expect broad consultations with member states and stakeholders throughout 2026 and 2027. These will shape how the framework takes place in practice. This means that the next years will be critical for organizations that need to prepare for compliance and future participation.
So let's turn to what counts as health data under the EHDS. So at its core, we are talking about electronically processed information related to a person's health or genetics. The regulation draws a line between two main categories. The first is the personal health data, which relates to an identified or identifiable individual, for example, patient records that can be linked back to a specific person. And the second is non-personal health data, which is either fully anonymized, so that no individual can be identified anymore, or it is data that never related to a person in the first place. So health data can come from a very wide range of sources. We have health apps, medical devices, electronic health record systems, diagnostics and lab systems, imaging, wearables, etc. Essentially the full ecosystem of digital and clinical tools. So concretely, that includes patient summaries, e-prescriptions, lab results, imaging studies, discharge reports, and genetic information. So the scope is intentionally broad, capturing both traditional clinical data and the growing volume of digital health information. It's also useful to distinguish how this data is used. So for primary use, as we said, the data is used directly in the care of the patient, a doctor looking at the lab result to make a diagnosis, or a hospital using an imaging report to plan some treatment. We are going to talk about it a little bit later, but it's already important to underline it that here GDPR already governs the processing of personal data, and the EHDS adds extra rules around interoperability and patient rights, but the core purpose remains treatment. For secondary use, the same types of data are reused for purposes other than the individual direct care. So, for example, we have research, AI development, public health monitoring, or policy making. If the data is still personal or pseudonymized, GDPR continues to apply. But EHDS adds a specific health-focused framework on top which defines who can access what, for which purposes, and under what safeguards, and usually within secure processing environments. So a key requirement for organization is that health data holders must provide descriptions of their data sets to My Health at EU and to Health Data at EU infrastructures. And this catalog is essential for transparency, interoperability, and for enabling both primary and secondary use of data. In practice, so if you are a company generating health data, you will need to know exactly what you hold, in what format, and for what purposes, and you need to be ready to document that. So it's an early step, but a crucial one that companies and SMEs should already be planning for.
Okay, so this slide will walk us through the implementation timeline of the European Health Data Space. So this is worth spending a moment looking at because these dates explain how the system will actually roll out in practice. So to begin with, the regulation was published in the official journal of the European Union on 5th of March 2025, and then formally entered into force on the 26th of March 2025. This means that the clock has already started. The next major milestone is the adoption of the implementing acts. So these are the detailed technical rules that will specify interoperability formats, logging standards, and the requirements for secure processing environments. These will all be adopted by 26th of March 2027. So this 2-year window is going to be crucial because it's going to define the practice obligations that companies will need to meet for this act. After that, we move into a phased implementation. The first set of primary use obligations become applicable on 26th of March 2029. So that means by this date, member states must be technically ready to exchange these categories of data through My Health at EU. The next group of primary use categories, as well as certain categories used for secondary purposes, such as genetic data, become applicable by 26th of March 2031. So this is going to be when secondary use infrastructure, such as the health data access bodies and secure processing environments, will be fully operational. And then if we look further ahead, third countries that wish to participate in the secondary use system through health data at EU can only do so from 26th of March 2034 and onwards. So what does this all mean for Irish SMEs? So although the regulation is already in force, many of the obligations only come in 2029 and 2031. So this is going to give some breathing room, but the work that underpins compliance will not be able to be finished last minute. The period between now and 2027 will be the moment to prepare because that is when the detailed technical rules will be set and when companies should begin aligning their roadmaps. So by 2029, if you work with patient summaries or e-prescriptions, you will need to be ready for cross-border exchange. Then by 2031, if you deal with imaging, lab data, or genetics, or you plan to access secondary use data, the expectations will be much higher. The timeline is deliberately staged because health IT systems across Europe vary enormously in maturity. But for SMEs, the message is simple. You don't have to meet everything at once, but you do need to have a roadmap. And starting early is going to give you a real competitive advantage with this.
So, what does the EHDS actually say? So, it introduces a core set of obligations that reshape how health data is handled across the EU. And at the center of these obligations is a new right for individuals to access and share their electronic health data wherever they are in the Union. So, to make this possible, the electronic health record systems across all member states must comply with common EU standards. So these standards are not just aspirational, they are written into hard law. And the EHR systems that process priority categories of health data must undergo a mandatory conformity self-assessment against two harmonized software components, the European interoperability component and the European logging component. In practice, that means that manufacturers now have to be able to show that their systems can exchange data in the European EHR exchange format and that they have robust standardized logging in place. The regulation also sets out specific obligations for different economic operators in the EHR supply chain. So manufacturers, importers, and distributors each have defined responsibilities to make sure that only compliant EHR systems are placed on the market and that technical documentation, declarations of conformity, and CE marking are in order. So even when an EHR is developed in-house by a hospital, for example, and not sold on the market, it still has to comply after a transitional period. On the secondary use side, organizations that qualify as health data holders have a legal duty to make certain categories of electronic health data available when the health data access body issues a data permit or approves a health data request. That includes many public and private bodies that generate or control health data. One nuance that may be relevant is that natural persons and micro enterprises are exempt from these data holder obligations for secondary use, which is an important proportionality safeguard at the very small end of the market. A key principle running through the EHDS is patient control. So individuals will be able to see who accesses their data. They will have the ability to restrict certain types of access, and they will hold clear rights over how their information is shared for both primary and secondary purposes. Of course, with these rights come serious enforcement mechanisms. Health data access bodies have a toolbox of powers. They can issue warnings, order organizations to remedy non-compliance within a set deadline, impose daily penalty payments, and in serious cases, temporarily exclude an entity from accessing secondary use data up to 5 years. And on top of this, they can propose or impose administrative fines. So for standard non-compliance, organizations can actually face fines up to 10 million or 2% of their annual global turnover. For more serious breaches, particularly those involving unlawful access or misuse of data, penalties rise to 20 million or 4% of the global turnover. And these levels are deliberately aligned with the GDPR. And the EHDS makes clear that nothing here reduces or replaces obligations you may already have under GDPR, under the medical device regulation, under the in vitro diagnostics regulation, or the Cyber Resilience Act. So in many cases, you will be complying with several of these regimes at once. Finally, each member state must establish dedicated authorities responsible for monitoring and enforcing compliance. That includes digital health authorities, market surveillance authorities for EHR systems, and the health data access bodies for secondary use. So together, they oversee EHR conformity, data holder obligations, and secondary use procedures. Overall, the framework introduces meaningful new rights for individuals, but also very concrete enforceable obligations for data holders, EHR manufacturers, importers, and distributors, and for any company operating within the Europe's health digital ecosystem.
Okay, so what does the EHDS mean specifically for Irish SMEs operating in areas such as medtech, life science, and digital health? So under the regulation, certain organizations are classified as health data holders and can be legally required to make their data sets available for approved secondary uses. That obligation does not just fall on hospitals and public bodies. If your organization collects, generates, or processes electronic data as part of a product or service, you may be in scope. This will include EHR vendors, medical device manufacturers, digital health and telehealth platforms, diagnostics companies, and in some cases, wellness or health apps. So in practice, this means that when Ireland's future health data access body receives a valid application from a research organization, a regulator, a public health authority, or another company working on innovation, it can require you as a data holder to prepare and provide the relevant data set in a usable format. This will be a legal duty, not a voluntary arrangement, unless a specific exemption applies. So that means there are clear obligations to share data for secondary use when the conditions are met. From the company side, if you want to access secondary data, the process is structured. You will just submit a data permit application explaining what data you need for what EHDS permitted purpose, for how long, and with what safeguards. If the health data access body approves the application, you won't get to download raw data on your own systems. Instead, you will work with data inside a secure processing environment where your actions are logged and, if necessary, will be audited. So there are costs and administrative burdens attached to this. Health data access bodies will be able to charge fees for assessing applications, preparing data sets, and anonymizing your data. So data holders may also recover reasonable costs for making data available. Internally, companies are going to need governance, documentation, security controls, and staff time to manage both sharing and access. So any SMEs that start building the structure early will feel the impact far less than those who will leave it till the regime is fully live. Finally, the question we often get from digital health firms is whether health app companies will have to feed data into EHR systems. So although the regulation does not impose a blanket obligation on every app, if your app is used in clinical settings, claims interoperability with EHRs, or forms part of a care pathway, then in practice, you will be drawn into the interoperability and logging standards under the primary use pillar. And even if you technically never integrate with an EHR, if you collect health data, you may still qualify as a data holder under the secondary use rules and therefore have these sharing obligations. So for Irish SMEs, the picture is clear. The EHDS creates real duties to share data, a structured pathway to access secondary data, fees, and admin work to plan for, and a strong incentive for health apps to think seriously about EHR interoperability. At the same time, it's going to open the door to EU-wide data sets, and this will dramatically enhance research, AI development, and product validation. So this will be a major opportunity if you prepare for it properly.
So, as already mentioned before, the EHDS sits within a wider EU data governance landscape. So, it's important to understand how it fits in with existing laws. So, let me start with GDPR, because GDPR remains a foundation for all processing of personal data, including health data. What the EHDS does is to add a sector-specific layer on the top of it. So it clarifies when electronic health data can be used, for which purposes, under what conditions, and with which safeguards. The GDPR protects personal data rights and lawful processing, and the EHDS creates the governance and technical infrastructure to share health data safely. In practice, that means that whether you are acting as a data holder or applying to access secondary data, you still need strong GDPR compliance underneath. EHDS is not a workaround. So next we have the Data Governance Act. The DGA is a horizontal law creating the frameworks for trustworthy data sharing across the EU. Covering things like public sector data reuse, data intermediaries, and data altruism. And the EHDS builds directly on those mechanisms, but applies them in a highly specialized and health-specific way. So if your company acts as a connector between data holders and data users, or if you participate in data altruism schemes, you may need to comply with both. So the DGA providing the general principles and the EHDS providing the concrete execution for health. And finally, we have the Data Act, which governs access to and use of data generated by connected devices, including medical devices, wearables, and IoT tools. So many medtech companies fall under this regulation because their device generate telemetry or patient-related data. And the EHDS does not override the Data Act. Instead, it adds an additional requirement when that device-generated data counts as electronic health data. So a company may find itself actually applying the Data Act to its device-level obligations, the GDPR to personal data, and the EHDS to interoperability and secondary use rules. It may sound complex, and it is layered, but the takeaway is clear. Companies cannot treat these frameworks in silos. You need a single coherent data governance approach that understands which law applies to which data set, when and why. Increasingly, hospitals, regulators, and procurement bodies will expect you to speak fluently across GDPR, the DGA, the Data Act, and the EHDS, because in the health sector, all of them apply at once.
Okay, so here we're going to look at some practical issues that may affect implementation. So this is where some of the real challenges will sit. One of the biggest hurdles for the European health data space is achieving genuine harmonization across 27 very different health systems. Member states will need to agree on common, harmonized data formats, and that is far from straightforward, since every country has its own legacy IT systems, its own standards, and very different levels of digital maturity. This will turning this patchwork into a single interoperable EU framework is going to take time, coordination, and a lot of technical work behind the scenes. Then, in addition to this, the EU has set aside funds to help countries and organizations build and upgrade the systems needed to plug into the EHDS. This is from modernizing national infrastructures and improving interoperability to creating secure data access environments for secondary use. This initial money will be important to get things moving, but it's equally important to be honest. This is not a one-off spend. So for the EHDS to work in practice, member states will need ongoing, stable financial support and long-term planning. So these systems are going to have to be maintained, updated, secured, and continuously aligned with evolving EU standards. So when you look at the EHDS implementation, don't picture a single deadline and then job done. Instead, think of a sustained digital transformation program in healthcare, where both Brussels and national governments, including Ireland, will have to keep investing if they want the system to deliver on its promises.
So concretely, the European health data space will also create major opportunities for innovation and market expansion across the EU. First, it will support Europe-wide health innovation. So under the EHDS, businesses that are partnering with hospitals, for example, or research institutions will be able to access secure and high-quality data sets from multiple countries across Europe, instead of being limited to one hospital system or to a small national data set. You can test and validate and refine a technology across real world data from different populations and care settings. That makes product development faster, gives you stronger evidence, and helps you demonstrate clinical value much easier. That can significantly shorten validation timelines and make your product more attractive to regulators, clinicians, and investors. The second example is the expansion into EU markets. A core feature of the EHDS is, as Niamh mentioned, is that it introduces a more predictable and harmonized data access process across all member states. So companies won't have to navigate 27 different national procedures. You will have clear rules, clear timelines, and a more consistent pathway for accessing health data sets across the EU. That means that it becomes much easier to scale a digital health product or medical technology beyond a member state or beyond Irish market, because the data infrastructure and authorization processes will be far more aligned. Now, when we speak about these opportunities, there is a question that comes up quite often. Does the EHDS create a new authorization pathway for medicines or medical devices? And will the clinical trials regulation or the medical devices regulation be amended to incorporate the EHDS requirement? So clearly, the answer is no. The EHDS does not authorize new drugs or devices. It does not change the CE marking requirements, and it does not amend the clinical trials regulation or the medical device regulation. Those authorization frameworks remain exactly as they are today. What does change, and that links us back to the two examples that we mentioned, is the evidence ecosystem around the authorization. So because companies will be able to use high quality real world data from across Europe, regulators will increasingly expect to see evidence that reflects the EHDS environment. So interoperable systems, strong audit logs, and robust real world data supporting safety and performance. So while the legal authorization pathways aren't being rewritten, the kinds of data that you can use and the kinds of evidence that your competitors will be bringing and the regulators will be expecting are evolving. So for SMEs, that's actually an advantage. So if you are EHDS ready with interoperable systems and strong data handling, you stand out not only in procurement and partnerships, but also in the broader evidence landscape that the regulators work within.
Okay, so what should Irish SMEs be doing now to prepare for the European health data space? The very first step you need to do is map your health data landscape. You're going to need a clear understanding of what data you collect, where it's sitting, how it flows through your systems, and whether it counts as primary use data or secondary use data. This won't be just an administrative exercise, it will form the foundation for every compliance obligation you face under EHDS, from dataset descriptions to interoperability to secondary use requests. So secondly, we strongly recommend joining trade associations and industry consultations. As we mentioned before, over the next 2 years, the Commission will be drafting a series of implementing acts, and Irish authorities will be shaping national systems. Trade bodies are often the ones in the room during these discussions, and being connected to that process will keep you informed and give you an opportunity to influence practical on-the-ground decisions that will affect SMEs. Thirdly, you need to start engaging with Irish authorities early. So Ireland will be establishing new governance structures, including its own health data access body, and designing national processes. So early dialogue with national bodies means you can prepare for upcoming requirements, understand the timelines, and identify opportunities for funding and technical support early. So looking at the EHDS from a technical perspective, companies are going to need to turn their attention to the electronic health record related software components, because this is where the regulation is very explicit. So the EHDS imposes a mandatory conformity self-assessment scheme for the harmonized software components of EHR systems. What that means in practice is that if you place an EHR system or certain EHR integrated software on the EU market, you will have to self-certify that it meets the European EHR exchange format, supports interoperability, and has the required logging capabilities. This again will not be optional. It is a regulatory obligation tied directly to market access, and SMEs will need to ensure their development roadmaps and compliance processes are accounting for it. So finally, this is an excellent moment to strengthen partnerships with hospitals and research centres. Since under the EHDS, these collaborations will become increasingly valuable, whether you're co-developing solutions, validating algorithms, or preparing to access cross-border data through health data at EU. Organizations that already have strong clinical partnerships will be in a much better position to leverage the new system once it's live. So the overall message is simple. Although the EHDS will be phased in over several years, the organizations that are preparing now, by understanding their data, tightening their technical foundations, and engaging with the policy process, will be the ones best placed to benefit within the new framework when it becomes fully available.
So as we wrap up this part of the presentation, it's useful to highlight the key sources of support that organizations can draw on as the European health data space is implemented. So we have Enterprise Ireland, of course, which will remain an important partner for SMEs, offering guidance, capability building, and potential support for digital transformation projects aligned with EHDS requirements. Businesses can also look to EU funding programs such as the EU for Health, which provides opportunities to finance digital health projects, interoperability upgrades, and cross-border innovation. On the technical side, the EU will offer support through the My Health at EU infrastructure, helping member states and organizations meet interoperability and data exchange standards. A major new element will be the creation of the European Health Data Access Bodies. These bodies will coordinate and authorize access to secondary use data, and they will be key partners for companies seeking to work with the EU-wide data sets. And finally, national authorities, including the Ireland's Department of Health, will play a central role in shaping how the EHDS is implemented domestically. Engaging early with these authorities can help organizations anticipate requirements and benefit from emerging guidance. So together, all these support mechanisms form an essential ecosystem to help all organizations adapt and succeed under the EHDS. And now I will just pass over to Geraldine for her part of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Do I have control of the slides also? Thank you. So basically, I'm going to tell you who we are. So Health Innovation Hub Ireland, we are a government initiative from the Department of Trade, Enterprise and Employment and the Department of Health. And we are funded by Enterprise Ireland and the HSE. So we're a team across the country of about 16 academic researchers and clinical staff across the regional health authorities in the West and Northwest Galway, which is where I'm based, Dublin, the Midlands, and in Cork. So we work with the academic institutions in those areas, University of Galway specifically with the clinical research facility there, Trinity College Dublin, and in Cork, UCC and MTU. So we are practical enablers in this space, and we work to bridge the gap between industry, healthcare, and academia. And basically, our targets are, driven through Enterprise Ireland to support the development of Irish companies, to drive exports and create jobs. So what we do, well, we sit very much in the centre of a vibrant ecosystem here in Ireland, and we straddle that across academia, industry and healthcare, and we run along the policies of the government agencies. So what we do is we test, evaluate and help commercialise new technologies, products and services in healthcare. And in that, we drive the acceleration of healthcare innovation and improve patient care. And we're very much aligned with the Sláinte policy of supporting integrated patient-centred care, improving efficiency in the health system, and fostering collaboration between healthcare providers, businesses, and government. So practically, what does that mean? Well, we have three core pillar areas of support that we work in. So we do work across the full commercial pathway, but this is where we come in that pathway. So we can work with innovators from inside and outside the healthcare space. We work with new startup SMEs, and we also work with multinationals, depending on what stage they're at. So in the idea assessment, we will do an independent assessment of a new idea for an innovator or a startup SME. We will look across the full path of that. So we will look at the problem and the solution. We will talk about markets and the competitor space and do a full report at that early stage of development. In the second clinical evaluations, we are dealing with pre-commercial products or prototypes, and we will reach in then to our clinical network through our HSE clinical liaisons to validate those solutions, ideas, innovations, devices, etc., that come to us. So we would run studies, focus groups with our key opinion leaders in the health system for that process. And then finally, for market-ready products who are CE marked, we run pilot studies. So there we're looking at real-world research, we're looking at feasibility of the product, the impact of the product in place, and looking to report on the pilot and to create a case study at the end so that those companies can use that then to take their product to the next level of hopefully adoption within the HSE or in the UK markets or further abroad. So we also have annual open calls in these four areas. Some of them are newer than others. So we ran the Green Tech call this year with sustainable healthcare. We still have pilots ongoing in that space. The Femtech network we created some years ago in 2022. To date, we've supported 37 Irish Femtech companies. And most recently, we have produced a Femtech report. So I'd encourage you to go and download that report if you haven't seen it. We always have a call around the Clinical Innovation Awards, which is reaching into our healthcare and actually getting the ideas coming from our clinical staff, and we support them to bring those ideas forward because often they're at the very forefront of the need. And lastly, our AI call. So we've just closed our AI call. We're about to announce our winners, and our plan is to run 11 pilot projects in the next year in this space. And this will be important, obviously, in the current topic when we're talking about readiness for the EHDS, about data handling processes, and about aligning with the digital transformation that's happening in Ireland at the moment and just creating readiness for our SMEs. So a couple of examples. So this is a multinational that we worked with for clinical evaluation. So this was on site in Galway at the University Hospital Galway. Merit Medical came in with a simulated device for our interventional radiologists that came into the room, and they were able to use the device and test its usability and give feedback live in that situation. And secondly, the next pilot, we've just finished this pilot actually with EcoSpray, a sustainability pilot. This is the second time we've worked with this company. We first of all did a usability pilot on the image quality of the spray, and that got very good results. So we've now looking at the sustainable side of EcoSpray and doing a comparison into normal usage in the hospital, what would be used in terms of gel, and how EcoSpray can improve that. And so finally, just to go back to the support summary. So in the idea of ideas, we do an independent assessment of the commercial potential of the idea. For the pre-commercial and prototypes, we assess the key opinion leaders, access the key opinion leaders for feedback and the solution problem fit. And in the commercial ready products, we facilitate the pilots, which looks at the value and impact study conducting with patients in a real healthcare site. So if you would like to learn more, please access our portal, hih.ie, and I'm very happy also to hear from anybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Geraldine, and thanks to everyone for the detailed and forward-looking presentations. We do have time for some questions, so perhaps I'll kick off with one for Hannah and Niamh. So say I'm a small digital health SME, how do we know if we're already a health data holder with the associated legal duties to share data under the EHDS?
Thank you, Simon. I will take that one. So, actually, under the EHDS, you are likely to be treated as a health data holder if you generate, collect, or control electronic health data as part of your product or service. So, for example, if your app or device records structured health information, patient-generated data, lab type outputs, or clinical measurements, that status is not limited to hospitals or big public bodies. It can include private companies too. And if you are in scope and a health data access body approves a data access request that covers data that you hold, you can be legally required to prepare and supply those data sets in a usable format within defined deadlines and under strict safeguards. So, sorry. The main explicit exemption is for natural persons and microenterprises who are carved out from the data holder obligations for secondary use. But once you grow beyond microenterprise level, you should plan on these obligations applying to you. So the practical first step is data mapping exercise. List your data sets, understand which are electronic health data under the regulation, and then assume that beyond microscale, you may be treated as a data holder for those.
Brilliant. That's great. A really useful clarification. Really important to know regarding the legal obligations as well. Perhaps another question for Hannah and Neve. Say for a company with limited resources, if you had to choose three things to prioritize or work on over the next 12 to 24 months or to prepare, what would they be?
I'll take this one. So I think we would suggest three very practical priorities. So as we mentioned in the presentation, the first one is you really need to map your data and systems. So work out what electronic health data you actually hold, where it's sitting, who controls it, and which of it falls into primary and secondary use data. I would also list which of your products might be considered EHR systems or EHR integrated modules. That's the basis for everything else. Then secondly, you need to align your roadmap with the EHDS timeline. So watch the implementing acts between now and 2027, because these are going to set detailed interoperability formats, logging requirements, and testing environments for EHR software. If you build on these milestones, you won't be scrambling just before 2029 or 2031. Lastly, as we said, it would be really important to build governance and partnerships. So put in place a simple but robust governance setup, someone responsible for the EHDS and GDPR, basic policies on data access and secondary use, and a plan for how you're going to respond to health data access body requests or apply for a data permit yourself. At the same time, I would cultivate relationships with hospitals and research centers now, because those will be invaluable when you want to work with real-world data under the new regime.
Brilliant. That'll really help companies to define priority areas over the next 2 years and plenty to consider. Now moving to Geraldine. Geraldine, I was wondering if you could perhaps elaborate on how the work of the Health Innovation Hub aligns with the EU health data space.
Yeah, sure, Simon. I think just what Nia said there, we very much help in the space of connecting the SMEs to the healthcare space. We help to validate digital innovation apps and AI tools, connected devices that will require EHDS interoperability, and accelerate adoption of electronic health record linked solutions. So also in our evaluations and pilots, we enforce data governance and compliance. So we're working with them at the early stage to ensure they have these things in place, like the likes of GDPR and ethical standards, but also that they're thinking about adopting good data handling processes and that they're aligning their roadmaps, as Niamh and Hannah have both said, to what's coming next. And ultimately, our projects that we run, we are generating that anonymized data sets and usability insights. So just making people aware that they are creating this data and that they will have to handle it and maybe make it available to other people too once those requests come in for data.
Thanks, Geraldine. Yeah, really, really important work that the Health Innovation Hub is carrying out. I think this one is also for Hannah and Niamh. Who pays for the technical upgrades to interoperable formats? Is it the SMEs or the healthcare providers?
I can take this one. So ultimately, both sides are going to need to invest, but the EHDS makes it very clear that economic operators placing EHR systems or EHR connected software on the market are going to be responsible for ensuring their products comply with the interoperability and logging standards. So this will mean SMEs selling digital health software are going to need to budget for things like updating their system to support the European EHR exchange format, enhancing logging functionality, ensuring compatibility with national systems, and also for providing technical documentation for conformity self-assessment. Then on the hospital side, member states will receive EU funding to upgrade their own infrastructures, but SMEs are expected to finance these upgrades needed for their own products themselves. Unfortunately, there's no current EU level compensation mechanism for vendors who need to update software for EHDS compliance. So companies really should plan now for that investment across 2026 and 2029.
Thanks for that answer. Really important considerations in that case for resourcing and financial planning going forward. Another question, who owns the data after it's been approved from health access bodies? Is it the researchers, the companies, or the patients? And a second question, is there an opportunity for patients to opt out?
Yeah, so I will take the one on the ownership. So actually, under the EHDS, patients do not own their data, but they retain strong rights over how it is accessed and used. So the actual owners are not researchers or companies either. Instead, healthcare providers and national health authorities act as data holders or controllers, while researchers, companies, and public bodies may receive permission-based access to secondary use data sets through EHDS health data access bodies. So these users gain limited and very purpose-bound rights to use the data, never ownership. And all access must comply, of course, as we said, with strict safeguards, transparency rules, and patient rights under the GDPR. On the opt-out questions, the patients will gain a clear right to opt out for secondary use of their data, meaning they can refuse to allow their identifiable or pseudo-anonymized information to be accessed by researchers, companies, or other third parties through health data access bodies. So member states must implement mechanisms for citizens to register their opt-out. And these choices must be respected across all EHDS data sharing systems. So, however, some exemptions, limited exemptions may apply. So, for example, for uses in the public interest, such as serious cross-border health threats, while all other secondary uses must honor the patient's opt-out decision, ensuring stronger control and transparency for individuals and over how their data is reused.
Brilliant, thanks, Hannah. So I think it's fair to say transparency and choice is key. I think probably our final question, can SMEs also request health data from other organizations for other purposes, such as testing new platforms, such as AI tools?
So yeah, SMEs will in principle be able to request health data under the new EHDS for secondary purposes. This could be used for things like innovation, testing new platforms, creating AI tools, but accessing this data is regulated. So it's going to involve a permit process and it's going to come with strict privacy and security safeguards. So whether a particular SME's request will be approved is going to depend on how well they justify the use, how safe their processing setup is, and how their project aligns with the permitted secondary use purposes.
Brilliant, thank you. So I think that concludes all of our questions. Thanks so much, everybody, for the questions and for your input today. I hope the information that's been provided by our panel this morning has been useful. A huge thank you to Hannah and Niamh from Vulcan Consulting for their expertise, and of course to Geraldine O'Flynn from Health Innovation Hub Ireland for the insight around supports available to SMEs. I suppose before I wrap up, I would like to remind the audience that, as Hannah mentioned, Enterprise Ireland offers a range of supports for clients, including, for instance, around mentoring, funding, capability development, and including, of course, supports around innovation and R&D. And I would invite clients to visit our website, to find out more, but also, of course, to reach out to your dedicated client advisor to learn more about how Enterprise Ireland can support your business. And as mentioned earlier in the session, this is the third in a 6-part series of webinars, which essentially unpack upcoming policies that will affect Irish businesses. So I hope you will join us for the subsequent sessions in the coming months, and we'll be in touch with details on those webinars in due course. And with that, I will bring the webinar to a close. And thanks again to those of you who have joined us online and to the speakers.